In the high-stakes world of Manhattan dining, silence is usually a sign of appreciation. But at L'Orangerie, the city's most exclusive restaurant, silence meant one thing. Elias Thorne had just walked through the door. For 5 years, the staff of L'Orangerie lived in terror of the billionaire real estate mogul. He had ruined careers with a snap of his fingers and reduced grown men to tears over the temperature of a soup. He was untouchable, unstoppable. Until a Tuesday night in November, when he made the mistake of trying to crush the new waitress, Sarah. He thought she was just another nobody he could bully. He didn't know who she really was, or the devastating secret she was holding in her apron pocket. This is the story of how the rudest billionaire in New York lost everything in a single dinner service. The mood in the kitchen of L'Orangerie shifted the moment the reservation ticket printed. It was 4:30 p.m., 30 minutes before opening, and the machine spat out the small slip of paper with a mechanical hiss that sounded like a warning rattlesnake. Marcus, the general manager, a man who had survived 20 years in the brutal New York hospitality scene, went pale. He snatched the ticket, adjusted his glasses, and swore under his breath. "Listen up!" Marcus's voice cracked, betraying a fear he usually kept well hidden. The clattering of pots and the sizzling of pans stopped instantly. The brigade of chefs, the sommeliers, and the waitstaff froze. "We have a walk-in reservation confirmed by the owner's private line. Table 9, 7 Noir p.m. Elias Thorne." A collective groan rippled through the staff. To the outside world, Elias Thorne was a visionary. He was the CEO of Thorne Capital, a man who reshaped skylines and bought islands just to leave them empty. But to the service industry, he was a monster. He was known for the Thorne test, deliberately ordering items not on the menu, demanding impossible modifications, and leaving 0 tip on 5-figure bills just to prove dominance. "I'm not taking him," said Julian, the head waiter. Julian was a veteran. He had served presidents and royalty, but last time Thorne had thrown a scorching hot espresso napkin at Julian because the coffee creamer wasn't golden enough. "I'm serious, Marcus. I'll quit. I'll walk out right now." "I can't take him either," whispered Elena, the junior sommelier. "Last month he called me illiterate because I suggested a Pinot Noir he didn't recognize. I spent 20 minutes crying in the walk-in freezer." Marcus wiped sweat from his forehead. He looked at his roster. He couldn't afford to lose Julian. He couldn't afford a lawsuit from Eleanor. His eyes scanned the line of staff until they landed on the end of the row. Sarah. She had been hired 3 weeks ago. She was 24, quiet, and kept to herself. She had messy blonde hair tied back in a strict bun and wore a uniform that looked slightly too big for her slender frame. She was a runner, mostly carrying plates and refilling water, but she had been begging for a chance to serve tables to make extra tuition money for law school. "Sarah," Marcus said, his voice dropping an octave. Sarah looked up, her blue eyes calm, almost unbothered by the panic in the room. "Yes, Marcus. You want a section? You want to be a server?" "Yes, sir, I do." "You're taking table 9. You're taking Elias Thorne." The room went dead silent. Julian looked at the girl with a mix of pity and relief. It was like watching a lamb being volunteered for a sacrifice. "Okay," Sarah said simply. "Sarah, listen to me." Marcus stepped closer, gripping her shoulder. "Do not speak unless spoken to. Do not look him in the eye for too long. If he insults you, and he will insult you, you swallow it. You smile, you apologize. If he complains about the food, you take it back instantly. Do not fight him. He knows the owner. He can have you fired and blacklisted from every restaurant in this city before the appetizer hits the table. Do you understand?" Sarah adjusted her apron. There was a strange glint in her eye, something harder than the fear Marcus was expecting. "I understand, Marcus," she said. "I'll handle Mr. Thorne." What Marcus didn't know, what nobody in that kitchen knew, was that Sarah wasn't just a struggling law student. Her full name wasn't Sarah Miller, as it said on her employment forms. Her name was Sarah Vance, and she knew exactly who Elias Thorne was. In fact, she had been waiting for this meeting for 6 years. At 7 p.m. sharp, the heavy oak doors of l'Orangerie swung open. Elias Thorne didn't just walk into a room, he invaded it. He was a tall man, wearing a bespoke suit that cost more than Sarah's entire year of rent. He had silver-streaked hair swept back perfectly, and eyes that scanned the room like a predator looking for the weakest gazelle. He was flanked by 2 younger men, associates, or perhaps sycophants, who laughed too loudly at everything he said. The hostess, trembling slightly, led them to table 9, the best seat in the house, overlooking the glistening Manhattan skyline. Sarah watched from the service station. She took a deep breath, smoothed her skirt, and picked up the leather-bound menus. "Showtime," she whispered to herself. She approached the table. Elias was already in the middle of a loud story, completely ignoring her presence. "So I told the zoning commissioner, you can take your regulations and choke on them. I'm building the tower, and if the sunlight creates a glare for the park, the pedestrians can buy sunglasses." His associates roared with laughter. Sarah waited for a pause. It didn't come. She stepped into the gap. "Good evening, gentlemen. Welcome to l'Orangerie. My name is Sarah, and I'll be taking care of—" Elias didn't look up. He simply held up a hand, palm facing her face, silencing her mid-sentence. He continued talking to his associate. "The deal closes tomorrow at noon. Once I have the signature from that old bat at the Heritage Foundation, the land is ours." Sarah stood there, hand suspended, menu unaccepted. The other diners nearby glanced over, sensing the awkwardness. Julian, watching from across the room, winced. "Here we go," he thought. Finally, after an agonizing 45 seconds, Elias turned his head slowly. He looked at Sarah's shoes, then her knees, then her apron, finally landing on her face with a look of utter boredom. "Water," he said. "Sparkling. No ice. And bring me a bottle of the 98 Chateau Margaux." "Certainly, sir," Sarah said, her voice steady. "However, I believe we are currently out of the 98. The sommelier recommends the 2001 for a similar profile, or perhaps— Did I ask for a recommendation?" Elias cut her off, his voice loud enough for the surrounding tables to hear. "I asked for the 98. If you don't have it, go down to the cellar and find it. Or run to the store across the street and buy it. I don't care how you do it, just do your job." "Sir, the inventory—" "Are you deaf?" Elias slammed his hand on the table. The silverware jumped. "I don't want excuses from a girl who looks like she cuts her own hair. Get me the wine, now." One of the associates snickered. "She's probably new, Elias. Cut her some slack." "I don't do slack," Elias sneered, picking up his napkin and inspecting it as if it were dirty. "Competence is a luxury, apparently." Sarah felt the heat rise in her cheeks. The insult about her hair was petty, but the dismissal of her intelligence stung. She tightened her grip on her serving tray. "I will check the cellar again, Mr. Thorne," Sarah said coolly. She walked back to the kitchen. Marcus was pacing. "He wants the 98 Margaux," Sarah said. "We sold the last bottle 3 days ago," Marcus hissed. "He knows that. He checks the online inventory before he comes in just to order things we don't have. It's a power play." "So, what do I do?" "Take him the 2001, Marcus said, wiping his glasses frantically. "Decant it in the kitchen. Pour it into the crystal carafe. He won't know the difference. He's a label drinker, not a connoisseur. Just tell him you found a reserve bottle." Sarah looked at the bottle of 2001. It was dishonest. It was against the code of the restaurant. But seeing Marcus on the verge of a panic attack, she nodded. "Fine." She prepared the wine, letting it breathe, and walked back out to the floor. The dining room was tense. Everyone was watching table 9. Sarah approached and poured a small tasting amount into Elias's glass. He swirled it aggressively, not even looking at the color, and took a sip. He paused. The room held its breath. Elias spat the wine back into the glass. "Garbage!" he shouted. He stood up, grabbing the carafe Sarah was holding and wrenching it from her hand. "Do you take me for an idiot? This is the 2001. The tannins are completely different. I asked for the 98. "Sir," Sarah said, her voice hardening, losing the customer service sweetness. "It is the finest bottle we have, and shouting is not necessary." The restaurant went silent. Even the piano player stopped. Elias stared at her. His face turned a shade of crimson. He wasn't used to back talk. He was used to tears. "What did you say to me?" Elias whispered, leaning in, invading her personal space. "I said—" Sarah met his eyes, her posture perfectly straight. "Shouting is unnecessary. You are disrupting the other guests." Elias laughed. It was a cruel, barking sound. "The other guests? I could buy this building and turn it into a parking lot by tomorrow morning. I am the only guest that matters." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone. "Marcus!" he bellowed. "Get out here, now!" Marcus came running from the kitchen, looking like a man marching to the gallows. "Yes, Mr. Thorne? Is everything all right?" "Fire her!" Elias pointed a manicured finger at Sarah's face. "Right now, in front of me. Throw her out on the street. She tried to serve me swill and then insulted me." Marcus looked at Sarah. He looked at Elias. He looked at the other diners who were filming on their phones. "Mr. Thorne, she's new. Perhaps a warning. Fire. Her." Elias slammed his fist on the table again. "Or I call the health department and my friends at the Michelin board. I'll burn this place to the ground, Marcus. Choose." Sarah looked at Marcus. She saw the defeat in his eyes. He was a good man, but he was weak. He had a mortgage and 2 kids in college. "Sarah," Marcus whispered, his voice trembling. "I'm sorry. Hand over your apron." Elias crossed his arms, a smug, triumphant grin plastering his face. He had won. He always won. Sarah slowly untied her apron. But she didn't look like a victim. She didn't cry. She folded the apron neatly and placed it on the empty chair next to Elias. "You're making a mistake, Marcus," Sarah said calmly. "Get out," Elias barked, "and take your cheap shoes with you." Sarah turned to Elias. A smile played on her lips, a smile that was dangerous. "I'll leave," Sarah said. "But you might want to check who you're actually meeting for dinner tonight, Elias." Elias frowned. "What are you talking about?" "I'm meeting the representative from the Vance estate to sign the deal." "Yes," Sarah said. "James Vance, my grandfather." Elias froze. The blood drained from his face so fast it looked like he was fainting. "No," he stammered. "James Vance's granddaughter is... She's in Europe. She's a law student," Sarah corrected him, "who wanted to see if the man buying her family's heritage was worthy of it. And you just failed the interview." The silence that followed Sarah's revelation was heavier than the crystal chandelier hanging above them. For a moment, the only sound in l'Orangerie was the hum of the wine fridge and the ragged breathing of Elias Thorne. Elias blinked, his brain misfiring as it tried to reconcile the 2 images before him. The servant he had just humiliated, and the heiress holding the keys to the biggest deal of his career. "Sarah! Vance!" Elias choked out, his voice losing all its booming authority. It sounded thin, reedy. He looked at his associates for help, but they were staring at their shoes, distancing themselves from the blast radius. "The one and only," Sarah said, crossing her arms. She didn't look like a waitress anymore. Even in the stained white shirt and cheap black trousers, she radiated a cold, aristocratic authority that money couldn't buy. Elias's face went through a spasm of contortions. First shock, then denial, and finally, a desperate, oily attempt at charm. He forced a laugh, a loud, hollow sound that echoed painfully in the quiet room. "Ha ha, ha 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 ha. Oh, that is rich." Elias clapped his hands together, standing up and reaching out as if to hug her. "A test? It was a test, wasn't it? Sarah, my dear, you really had me going there. I knew something was different about you. The fire, the spirit. I was just playing along, testing the staff's mettle. You know how it is in business. You have to push people to see what they're made of." He reached for her hand. Sarah didn't move. She didn't flinch. She just let him reach into the empty air until his hand dropped awkwardly to his side. "Don't touch me," she said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of a judge's gavel. "Right, of course. Boundaries." Elias wiped his sweaty palms on his expensive suit pants. "Look, Sarah. Ms. Vance, we got off on the wrong foot. The heat of the moment. I've had a stressful day. The market in Hong Kong opened down. My driver was late. You understand stress, don't you? I understand that you just tried to have a woman fired for not having a bottle of wine that you knew didn't exist," Sarah said. She turned to Marcus. The general manager was shaking. He looked like he wanted to crawl into the floor vents. "Marcus," Sarah said softly. "Sarah. Ms. Vance." "I had no idea," Marcus stammered, wringing his hands. "If I had known, I never would have." "You would have what?" Sarah cut him off. "You would have treated me with respect because of my last name." "That's the problem, Marcus. You should have treated me with respect because I'm a human being, because I work for you, because I'm good at my job." Marcus lowered his head. I was trying to protect the restaurant," he threatened the Michelin rating. "A restaurant without integrity doesn't deserve stars," Sarah said. "You chose a bully over your own team. Remember that." She turned back to Elias, who was frantically pouring himself a glass of water, his hands trembling so much the pitcher clinked against the glass like a distress signal. "My grandfather will be here in 10 minutes, Sarah said, checking her cheap plastic watch, a deliberate contrast to Elias's gold Rolex. "He hates lateness, and he hates rudeness. I suggest you sit down, shut up, and pray I don't tell him exactly what just happened." Yes, of course." Elias sat down heavily. He looked like a deflated balloon. "Ms. Vance, Sarah, can we start over? Please. The deal, the West Side project. It means everything. Not just to me, but to the city. Jobs. Infrastructure." "Save the pitch," Sarah said, pulling out the chair opposite him, the one reserved for her grandfather, and sitting down. "I'm not the one you need to convince anymore. I've already made up my mind about you. Now you just have to survive dinner." The kitchen staff were peering through the porthole window of the swinging doors. Julian, the head waiter, was grinning so hard it looked painful. He gave Sarah a subtle thumbs up from the shadows. For the next 10 minutes, Elias Thorne, the terror of Wall Street, sat in terrified silence opposite a waitress, terrified to sip his water too loudly. At 7:30 p.m. precisely, the air in the restaurant shifted again. The doors opened, but not with the aggressive slam that heralded Elias. These doors opened slowly, respectfully held by the doorman. James Vance walked in. He was 80 years old, leaning on a cane made of polished black walnut. He wore a tweed suit that was probably 20 years old, but tailored to perfection. He didn't look like a billionaire. He looked like a retired history professor. But the way he moved, with deliberate, measured steps, commanded instant reverence. He was accompanied by his personal attorney, Mr. Sterling, a man who carried a briefcase like it contained nuclear launch codes. Elias shot up from his chair so fast he nearly knocked the table over. "Mr. Vance! James! What an honor!" Elias practically shouted, rushing forward with his hand extended. "Welcome, welcome. I took the liberty of securing the best table. And the view, it's magnificent." James Vance stopped it. He looked at Elias's extended hand, then up at his face. He didn't smile. He adjusted his glasses. "Mr. Thorne," James said, his voice gravelly and quiet. "You are loud." Elias froze. Excuse me?" "You are shouting," James said calmly. "I am old, not deaf." Elias turned a deep shade of purple. "My apologies, sir. Just enthusiasm. Pure enthusiasm for our project." James walked past him, ignoring the handshake entirely, and headed toward the table. His eyes landed on Sarah. Sarah hadn't stood up. She was leaning back in the chair, her arms crossed over her apron. "Sarah," James said, a genuine warmth finally entering his eyes. "I see you're still wearing the costume." "It's not a costume, grandfather," Sarah smiled. "It's a uniform, and I earned every dollar I made in it." "I don't doubt it," James chuckled. He sat down next to her. "Did you learn what you needed to learn?" "I learned plenty," Sarah said, shooting a sharp look at Elias. Elias scrambled back to his seat, sweat now openly dripping down his temple. "Ah, yes. Sarah, Miss Vance. She has been instrumental. Very hands-on. I was just telling her how much I admire a young woman who isn't afraid of hard work. It shows character. Just like her grandfather." James Vance stared at Elias for a long, uncomfortable moment. "Is that so? Because when I walked in, you looked like a man who had seen a ghost, and my granddaughter looks like she's ready to execute someone." No, we were just joking. Banter." Elias laughed nervously. "Shall we order? The wine list here is—" "We're not ordering," Sarah interrupted. "We're not?" Elias blinked. "No," Sarah said. "We're here to discuss the land, the 400 acres in the Hudson Valley, the Vance family estate." "Right, the deal." Elias opened a folder he had brought with him. He tried to regain his composure, switching into business mode. He smoothed his tie. "Mr. Vance, as we discussed on the phone, Thorne Capital is prepared to offer 20% above market value. We have the permits lined up. We have the architectural renders. It's going to be a masterpiece. The Thorne Sanctuary. Luxury eco-condos. Very green. Very sustainable. We're going to preserve the forest, keep the old chapel, and just build around the perimeter. It will honor your family's legacy." Elias spoke with the confidence of a con man who had rehearsed his lines 1,000 times. He pointed to glossy photos of glass buildings nestled in trees. "It sounds perfect," James Vance said slowly, looking at the photos. "Preservation is my top priority. That land has been in our family since the 1800s. My wife is buried in that chapel." "Exactly," Elias leaned in, sensing victory. "And that's why I'm the right man for the job. I respect history. I respect sanctity. The chapel will be the centerpiece, a memorial garden. It will be beautiful, James. I give you my word." James looked at Sarah. "Well, Sarah, you've been studying property law, and you've been observing Mr. Thorne. What do you think?" Sarah picked up the glass of water Elias had poured for himself earlier. She took a sip, deliberately slow. "He's lying," Sarah said. The room went dead silent again. "Excuse me," Elias sputtered. "That is a serious accusation. He's lying about the chapel. He's lying about the forest. And he's lying about the name," Sarah said. She reached into her apron pocket, the same pocket where she used to keep her order pad, and pulled out a small, crumpled device. It was a digital voice recorder. "See, Elias," Sarah said, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "Waitresses are invisible. People say things in front of the help that they would never say in a boardroom. They think we're just furniture. They think we don't understand English or business or zoning laws." She placed the recorder on the table. "This was recorded 3 nights ago," Sarah said, "when you came in for drinks with your architect, Mr. Krovos. You were at table 4. You ordered the scotch, remember?" Elias went pale. He remembered. He had been drunk. He had been loud. "Sarah, wait." Elias reached for the recorder, but Mr. Sterling, the attorney, blocked his hand with his briefcase. "Let's hear it," Mr. Sterling said. Sarah pressed play. The audio was slightly grainy, mixed with the clinking of glasses and background jazz, but Elias's voice was unmistakable. It cut through the noise, loud, arrogant, and slurring slightly. "The old man is a dinosaur, Krovos, a sentimental old fool." Elias's voice on the tape. "He thinks I'm keeping the chapel? Ha! The first thing we do when the ink dries is bulldoze that pile of bricks. It's right in the middle of the access road." On the tape, the architect laughed. "What about the wife's grave?" "Dig it up," Elias's voice sneered. "Move it to the county cemetery. Who cares? The guy will be dead in a year anyway. He won't know the difference. We need that space for the clubhouse pool. And the forest? Clear-cut it. Lumber is up right now. We can sell the wood and pay for the foundation before we even lay a brick. Call it the sanctuary to sell units to the hippies, but pave the whole damn thing." Sarah pressed stop. The silence at table 9 was absolute. James Vance's face had turned to stone. He didn't look angry. He looked devastated. And then, slowly, a cold fury replaced the sadness. He looked at the photo of the memorial garden Elias had just shown him. Elias was trembling. He looked like a trapped animal. He looked around the restaurant, realizing that people were watching. That's out of context," Elias stammered. That was just talk, locker room talk, just blowing off steam. I didn't mean it." "You called my wife a pile of bricks?" James Vance whispered. The sound was more terrifying than if he had screamed. "No. James, please. It was the scotch talking. I respect you. I respect the legacy." Elias was pleading now, sweat dripping onto his silk tie. "And the zoning?" Sarah interrupted, relentlessly. "I checked the public records this morning, Elias. You didn't file for eco-residential. You filed for commercial high-density. You aren't building condos. You're building a casino resort." Elias's mouth opened and closed. He had been caught, completely, utterly stripped bare. "A casino?" James Vance stood up. He grabbed his cane. His hands were shaking, not from age, but from rage. "You wanted to turn my wife's resting place into a gambling hall? It makes money, James!" Elias shouted, abandoning the charade. He stood up too, his face twisting into a snarl. "It makes millions. Who cares about a few trees and some bones? The world moves on. You're holding on to the past. I'm offering you $50 million. Take the money and die happy, you old fool." The mask was off. The monster the staff knew was finally revealed to the billionaire class. James Vance looked at Elias with pure disgust. "I would rather burn that land to ash than let a man like you touch a single blade of grass on it." "You can't back out," Elias yelled. "We have a verbal agreement. I have witnesses." He gestured to his 2 associates. The first associate, the one who had snickered at Sarah earlier, looked at Elias. Then he looked at James Vance. He looked at Sarah, who was staring him down with icy blue eyes. "I didn't hear an agreement," the associate said quietly. "What?" Elias spun around. "You traitor! I didn't hear anything," the associate said, standing up and grabbing his jacket. "And actually, I think I'm resigning, Elias. My mother is buried in a cemetery like that. I'm out." "Me too," the second associate said, standing up. This is too much, Elias." Elias stood alone. His allies were gone. His deal was dead. His reputation was bleeding out on the white tablecloth. "Get out," James Vance said. "You can't talk to me like that," Elias screamed. "I am Elias Thorne. I own half this city." "You own nothing here," Sarah said. She stood up, signaling to Marcus. Marcus, seeing the tide had turned, and perhaps trying to salvage a shred of his own soul, stepped forward. He signaled to the security guard who stood by the entrance. "Mr. Thorne," Marcus said, his voice stronger than it had been all night. "You are disturbing the guests. Please leave, or I will have you removed." "You're firing me," Elias laughed hysterically. "I'm the customer. You can't fire the customer." "We reserve the right to refuse service to anyone," Marcus quoted the sign on the door, "especially those who abuse the staff." Elias looked around. The entire restaurant had stopped eating. Waiters, busboys, diners, everyone was staring at him. He saw the judgment in their eyes. He saw the end of his dominance. He grabbed his jacket, knocking over his chair. "You'll regret this," Elias spat at Sarah. "You're just a waitress. You're nothing." "I'm the woman who just cost you $50 million, Sarah said, calmly. "And please, don't forget to tip on your way out. It's bad karma." Elias stormed toward the door, shoving a busboy aside. But as he reached the exit, he tripped. Maybe it was the loose carpet. Maybe it was his own rage. But Elias Thorne, the billionaire real estate mogul, face-planted onto the floor of l'Orangerie. A collective gasp went through the room. Then silence. Then someone in the back, maybe a dishwasher peeking out, maybe a diner, started to laugh. Elias scrambled up, red-faced, nose bleeding slightly, and ran out into the cold New York night. The adrenaline that had sustained the dining room of l'Orangerie finally crashed about 20 minutes after Elias Thorne fled the building. The silence broke slowly. First, a nervous giggle from a table near the window. Then, a slow clap. A diner in a tuxedo stood up and applauded. Then another. Within seconds, the entire restaurant was giving Sarah a standing ovation. Sarah didn't bow. She simply leaned against the table, her hands trembling slightly now that the confrontation was over. The weight of what she had done was settling in. She hadn't just insulted a rude customer. She had declared war on a man with a net worth of $4 billion. Marcus, the general manager, walked over. He looked 10 years older than he had an hour ago. He held a glass of brandy in his hand, his own personal stash. "Sarah," Marcus said, offering her the glass. "I'm on the clock, Marcus," Sarah said, eyeing him warily. "And technically you fired me." "I didn't fire you," Marcus said, his voice thick with regret. "I tried to save my own skin. And I am ashamed. Deeply ashamed." He looked at James Vance. "Mr. Vance, I owe you an apology as well. I allowed my fear of that man to compromise the dignity of this establishment. If you wish to leave, the meal is on the house. If you wish to stay, I will serve you myself." James Vance looked at Marcus. He was a man who understood human frailty. "We will stay, Marcus. But Sarah isn't waiting tables tonight. She's dining with me. Julian can take our order." "Yes, sir. Immediately." As Sarah sat down, removing the final vestiges of her server persona, she looked at her grandfather. You knew, didn't you? You knew I was working here." James smiled, cutting into the steak tartare that had just arrived. "Sarah, I have security teams that monitor the family. I knew the moment you applied. I was confused at first. Why would the top student at Columbia Law be wiping tables? But then I realized you were doing due diligence. You wanted to see the wolf without his sheep's clothing." "He's a monster, Grandpa," Sarah said quietly. "The way he treats people. It's not just rudeness, it's pathology. If we sold him the land, he would have destroyed everything." "I know," James said, his face darkening, "and thanks to you, the deal is dead. But Sarah, be warned. A man like Thorne doesn't lose gracefully. You embarrassed him. He will come for you." James was right. He was more right than he knew. The attack didn't come with a gun or a thug in an alley. It came the next morning, through the glowing screens of 1,000,000 smartphones. Sarah woke up in her small apartment to the sound of her phone buzzing incessantly. She picked it up and saw 400 missed notifications, texts from friends she hadn't seen in years, emails, Instagram tags. She opened Twitter, trending now for 1 in New York, which are Billionaire beatdown, trending now for 2, Hero Waitress, trending now for 3, Elias Thorne is broke. Someone at a nearby table, a teenage girl with a penchant for TikTok, had filmed the entire interaction. The video started right at the moment Elias screamed, "Fire her!" and ended with his faceplant into the carpet. The video had 12 million views in 8 hours. Sarah watched it, horrified. In the video she looked calm, almost regal. Elias looked like a deranged toddler. The comments were brutal. "City girl. I've waited on this guy before. He made me cry over a salad fork. Go, Sarah." Wall Street Watch. Thorne's stock is tanking pre-market. Investors hate bad PR. This waitress just wiped 5% off his market cap. Justice seeker. Wait, she's a Vance? That's James Vance's granddaughter? This is like a movie. Sarah dropped the phone on her bed. Her secret was out. She wasn't just Sarah the law student or Sarah the waitress anymore. She was a public figure. And then the second attack hit. A sharp knock on her door. Sarah opened it to find a courier holding a thick manila envelope. "Sarah Vance?" "Yes." "You've been served." She tore open the envelope. It was a lawsuit. Thorne Capital versus Sarah Vance and l'Orangerie Hospitality Group. The charges were staggering. 1. Defamation of character. 2. Violation of privacy, the recording. 3. Tortious interference with business relations. 4. Intentional infliction of emotional distress. Elias was suing her for $150 million. He wasn't trying to win money. He knew she didn't have it liquid. He was trying to bury her in legal fees, ruin her credit, get her expelled from law school, and force her grandfather to sell the land just to settle the debt. It was a bullying tactic. Legal warfare. Sarah looked at the paper. Her hands didn't shake this time. She walked over to her desk, pushed aside her law textbooks, and picked up her phone. She dialed her grandfather's attorney, Mr. Sterling. "Mr. Sterling," Sarah said, her voice cold and precise. "Don't settle. Don't offer him a dime. We're going to court." 2 weeks later, the conference room of Sterling, Cooper and Vance was ice cold. This was the deposition, a pre-trial questioning where lawyers try to intimidate the opposition. Elias Thorne sat at the head of the table, flanked by 4 lawyers from the most aggressive firm in the city, Shark and Partners. Elias looked rested. He had spun the narrative in the press. He claimed the video was edited, that Sarah had provoked him, that she was a spoiled heiress cosplaying as poor people to entrap honest businessmen. Sarah sat opposite him. She wore a navy blue suit, no apron today. She had no team of lawyers, just Mr. Sterling, who sat silently in the corner. Sarah was representing herself. "Miss Vance," Elias's lead lawyer, a sharp-faced woman named Helen Graves, began. "Let's discuss the recording. You are aware that recording a private conversation without consent is a violation of expectation of privacy in certain contexts?" "I am aware of New York penal law," Sarah said, her voice steady. "New York is a one-party consent state. As long as one person in the conversation consents to the recording, it is legal. I was in the room. I was part of the environment. And furthermore, Mr. Thorne was shouting. There is no expectation of privacy when you are screaming at the top of your lungs in a public restaurant with 60 witnesses." Helen Graves narrowed her eyes. She shuffled her papers. "You claim my client committed fraud regarding the zoning of the Vance estate. That is libel unless you have proof. The recording is just drunken rambling. It's not a legal document." "It's intent," Sarah said. "But you're right. I need more than intent." Sarah opened her briefcase. She pulled out a stack of documents. "This," Sarah slid a paper across the table, "is a subpoenaed email chain from Mr. Thorne's private server. It seems your client forgot that when he used the restaurant's Wi-Fi to send emails 2 months ago, he accepted the terms of service, which logs traffic on the guest network." Elias stiffened. "This email," Sarah continued, reading from the page, "is to the zoning commissioner. Subject line, the Vance problem. Contents. Don't worry about the environmental impact study. I paid off the inspector. Just get the casino permit ready. Once the old man signs, we pave the forest on Monday." The room went silent. Bribery, corruption, conspiracy to commit fraud. Sarah didn't stop. "And this," she slid another paper, "is a list of the investors for the Sanctuary project. 3 of them are shell companies linked to known organized crime syndicates in Macau. I imagine the SEC would be very interested to know that Thorne Capital is laundering money through real estate developments." Elias slammed his hands on the table. "You hacked me. That's illegal." "I didn't hack anything," Sarah smiled, a sharp, dangerous smile. "You were rude to the IT guy at L'Orangerie 3 years ago. You called him a nerd and refused to tip him for fixing your phone. His name is Kevin. He remembers you. And when I asked him if there were any logs of your activity on our network, well, he was very eager to help." Sarah leaned forward. "This isn't a deposition anymore, Elias. This is a crime scene, and you're the body." Helen Graves, Elias's lawyer, stopped writing. She looked at the email. She looked at her client. She slowly closed her laptop. "Mr. Thorne," Helen said quietly, "I think we need a recess." "No recess," Sarah said. "Here is the settlement offer. You drop the lawsuit. You resign as CEO of Thorne Capital. You issue a public apology to the staff of L'Orangerie. And you sign a permanent restraining order, staying 500 yards away from my family, my land, and my restaurant." "And if I refuse?" Elias sneered, though he looked like he was about to vomit. "Then I walk out of this room and hand this entire file to the district attorney, the FBI, and the New York Times," Sarah said. "You won't just be broke, Elias. You'll be in prison." Elias looked at his lawyers. They looked away. They knew a sinking ship when they saw one. Elias Thorne, the billionaire who thought he could buy the world, slumped in his chair. He looked small. He looked defeated. "Where do I sign?" he whispered. The fall of a titan. The collapse of Elias Thorne didn't happen in a single day. It was a slow, agonizing disintegration that the whole city watched with glee. 3 weeks after the deposition, Elias sat in his corner office at Thorne Capital for the last time. The view was still spectacular, overlooking Central Park, but the room was empty. The boxes were packed. the FBI had already raided the servers, and the board of directors had voted unanimously to oust him to save the company's stock price. His phone, which used to ring every 30 seconds with deals and offers, was dead silent. His secretary, a woman named Martha, who he had berated for years about her coffee-making skills, walked in. She didn't knock. She was wearing her coat, holding her purse. "Martha," Elias barked, trying to summon his old authority. "Call my driver. I'm leaving." Martha looked at him, her expression completely flat. "The car service account was suspended this morning, Elias. And I'm not calling anyone. I quit an hour ago." She dropped her ID badge on his mahogany desk. "Oh, and by the way, I'm the one who told the feds where you kept the duplicate ledgers." She walked out. Elias Thorne was left alone in the silence of his glass tower, a king with no kingdom, realizing that when you build a throne out of fear, no one is there to catch you when it breaks. The rising of the barn. While Elias's world was shrinking, Sarah's was expanding. Sarah stood in the middle of an old, dusty barn on the edge of the Vance estate. It smelled of hay and old timber. Sunlight streamed through gaps in the roof, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. "Are you sure about this?" James Vance asked, leaning on his cane in the doorway. "You have offers from the top 3 law firms in Manhattan. You could be making 6 figures starting tomorrow." Sarah ran her hand along a rough wooden beam. "I could. But then I'd just be fighting people like Elias in courtrooms for the rest of my life. I want to build something, Grandpa. Something that proves him wrong." She turned to him, her eyes bright. "He wanted to turn this land into a gambling hall, a place of greed. I want to turn it into a place of nourishment, a farm-to-table restaurant, but real. We grow the food right there." She pointed to the fields outside. "We cook it here, and we hire the people who need a break, the people the industry chews up and spits out." James smiled, a slow, proud smile. "Your grandmother would have loved that. She always said the kitchen was the heart of the home." "Then let's give this estate a heartbeat again," Sarah said. 6 months later. Opening night. The transformation was miraculous. The rotting barn was now a warm, glowing sanctuary of polished wood and glass. The sign above the heavy oak doors was hand-carved, the Golden Fork. It wasn't a stuffy, high-end French restaurant where you were afraid to cough. It was vibrant. It smelled of roasting garlic, rosemary, and wood smoke. Inside, the energy was electric. It was opening night, and the reservation book was full for 3 months. In the kitchen, the clamor was a symphony of controlled chaos, but unlike l'Orangerie, there was no screaming. There was no fear. "Risotto walking to table 4, shouted a familiar voice. It was Eleanor, the junior sommelier from the old job. She wasn't crying in a walk-in freezer anymore. She was beaming, carrying a tray of wines she had personally curated from the Hudson Valley vineyards. At the pass, checking every plate with a critical but kind eye, was Marcus. Sarah had found him working at a chain diner in New Jersey, trying to make ends meet after leaving l'Orangerie. He had been broken, convinced his career was over. Sarah had hired him on the spot. "Marcus," Sarah called out from the expo station, "how's the beef Wellington?" Perfectly," Marcus said, wiping a smudge from the rim of a plate. He looked at Sarah. "Chef says we're running low on the sea bass. Should I 86 it?" "No," Sarah said, rolling up her sleeves. "I'll run to the smokehouse and grab the reserve stock. You hold down the fort." "Yes, chef," Marcus replied. The respect in his voice was genuine. He wasn't afraid of her. He adored her. The guest of honor, Sarah, moved through the dining room. She wasn't wearing a suit. She wore a simple, elegant black dress with a small golden fork pin on the lapel. She stopped at the best table in the house, table 9. It was located near the large window that looked out over the moonlit forest and the preserved chapel. James Vance sat there. But he wasn't alone. He was sitting with the old staff from l'Orangerie, Julian the waiter, Kevin the IT guy, and even the busboy Elias had shoved. They were all eating together, sharing stories, laughing loud enough to be heard across the room. "Everything okay here?" Sarah asked, resting her hand on her grandfather's shoulder. "Terrible," Julian joked, swirling his glass. "The wine is too affordable, the food is too hot, and the owner is working too hard." The table erupted in laughter. "I have a toast," James Vance said, struggling to stand up. The table went quiet. The surrounding tables quieted down too, recognizing the patriarch. James raised his glass toward Sarah. "To the new waitress," James said, his voice thick with emotion, "who taught an old man that the most valuable property isn't land, it's loyalty, and who taught a billionaire that you can buy a $5,000 bottle of wine, but you can't buy class. To Sarah," the table cheered. "To Sarah," the entire restaurant echoed, raising their glasses. The final lesson. Later that night, after the last guest had left and the candles were being blown out, Sarah sat on the steps of the restaurant porch. The night air was crisp. Marcus came out, holding 2 espressos. He handed one to her and sat down. "We did it," Marcus sighed, exhausted, but happy. "We actually did it." "We did," Sarah smiled, sipping the coffee. "You know," Marcus said, looking at the stars, "I heard on the news today. Elias's trial starts next week. They say he's going to plead guilty to avoid a maximum sentence. He's bankrupt, Sarah. His assets are frozen. He's losing his penthouse, his Hamptons house, everything." Sarah looked out at the dark tree line of her family's forest. She thought about the rage she had felt 6 months ago. She thought about the humiliation. "I should feel happy," Sarah said softly. "I should feel victorious. Don't you?" "I feel relieved," Sarah said. "But mostly, I just feel sorry for him." "Sorry?" Marcus scoffed. "After what he did? He spent his whole life thinking he was above everyone else," Sarah said, standing up and brushing the dust off her dress. "He climbed so high that he forgot what the ground felt like. And now that he's hit it, he has no one to help him up." She turned back to the warm glow of the restaurant, where her friends, her true team, were laughing as they mopped the floors. "He died poor, Marcus," Sarah said. "Even with all his money, he was the poorest man I ever met." Sarah opened the door, the bell chiming softly. "Come on," she said. "Let's go help them close up. We've got a busy lunch service tomorrow." She walked back inside, not as an heiress and not as a victim, but as a server, ready to serve the people who deserved it. And that brings us to the end of the story of Sarah Vance and the downfall of Elias Thorne. It's a powerful reminder that the way you treat the little people says everything about who you really are. Elias thought his money made him untouchable, but in the end, it was the relationship Sarah built and the integrity she showed that won the war. He built a tower of glass. She built a home of wood and heart. I hope this story gave you some satisfaction. There is nothing quite like seeing a bully get exactly what they deserve. If you enjoyed this longer drama story, please hit that like button. It really helps the algorithm show this video to more people. And a question for you guys. If you were Sarah, would you have forgiven Marcus and hired him back? Or was he too complicit in the bullying? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next story. I've got a crazy one coming up next week about a bride who discovers her mother-in-law's secret at the altar. You won't want to miss it. Thanks for watching.